Hello and welcome to our program Where God Weeps, a program where we speak about the situation of the suffering church around the world. El Obeid is the only Catholic diocese in the world that is divided in two. Following the 2011 creation of South Sudan, the diocese was split, now encompassing areas held by both Sudan and South Sudan. Tragically, El Obeid is also an area torn by conflict. The territory of the Nuba Mountains is held by rebel forces seeking autonomy from the regime of Sudan's Omar Hassan al-Bashir. The northern Sudanese army has encircled the rebel troops and continues a campaign of indiscriminate bombing, harassment, and starvation against the Nuba people. Those who suffer the most are civilians, the elderly, the children. The climate of terror through the bombing raids made by Russian-made Antonov and MiG fighters have driven the Nuba people from their villages and prevented them from attending to their crops or livestock as they seek refuge in the Nuba Mountains. For the absence of any government, the Church has become the closest thing to an authority and the voice for those still caught in the spiral of violence. To tell us more, it is my great pleasure to welcome Mr. Stephan Marks, working with the Catholic Church in the El Obeid Diocese. Stephan, thank you for being with us here today in our program.
Thank you too.
Stephan, you are a German national. What first inspired you to go to Sudan, or to South Sudan now, rather?
South Sudan is a country which I don't think you find another equivalent in the whole of Africa. I've worked in 6 different countries so far, and the working environment and the preconditions. When I came there the first time, I thought I was thrown back into Stone Age. There was no infrastructure. And still today, in rural areas of South Sudan, it has not that much changed. In Juba, it is different, and some of the bigger towns. But if you come into rural areas,
what do you mean by
the same.
Just to give us an understanding of what you mean by the Stone Age? Would there, no communications, no electricity. What are we talking about?
You expect, for example, shops, but in some areas there are no shops, but maybe a weekly market, where then you have to buy all your supplies. You have no electricity, you have no roads. During the rainy season, you can hardly move from one place to the other unless you walk on foot.
What was the biggest challenge for you when you first came to Sudan?
Yeah, in my present job, the challenge I was forced to see immediately was that I had signed a contract for a peaceful environment, and I wanted to work for the development of the diocese, which is providing water, health, education. And then all of a sudden the war in the Nuba Mountains started after just some few months of after having signed the contract. So my position as the project or development coordinator changed into disaster and relief
management
organizer, yes.
Did you want to leave?
That was never an option, because I think after visiting 5 times the Nuba Mountains before the war started, you have so close connections to the other colleagues in the field, you cannot let them down. So
how about the people? How would you describe the Nuba people?
Compared to those tribes I saw in South Sudan, they are rather unique. They will never tell you, for example, which tribe they belong to. They will just tell you either I'm from the mountains or I am a Nuba. And then if you would ask in a second step, and to which tribe do you belong? Completely different from South Sudan. If you ask somebody, where are you from? He will not even tell you the area. He will just tell you, I'm a Dinka, I'm a Nuer, I'm a Kakwa.
What was the greatest challenge for you in your contact, or let's say your first contact with the people? Do you speak the language, for example, or what would you say would have been the greatest challenge?
I don't speak Arabic, but I think in the Nuba Mountains I also didn't need it because the education system went into English. They don't want to learn the language of the oppressor. So in our schools, English was the language of the day. And you have small children in P2 who address visitors in perfect English. They follow the Kenyan and Ugandan syllabus in the education system. So
it's not a problem.
They sit the Kenyan exams once a year.
All right. As we know, the Nuba Mountains are at the moment suffering tragedy. That is, that
Yes.
there's ongoing bombing from the MiG fighters, from the Antonov. Yes. Can you give us a little bit about the day-to-day? Just what is it that these people are living?
I think the Nuba have lived in war for many years. This is the third time that Khartoum tries to either extinct them or get them off their homeland. And the suffering of the people is immense. They are exposed to aerial bombardment on a daily basis, as you stated in your introduction. At the moment, Khartoum is trying to eliminate the crops in the field by dropping petrol bombs to destroy the harvest. I mean, it's just disaster.
Would you call it a genocide?
Yeah, it is difficult to name it, but...
Or let's ask a question in a different way. What is the purpose? Why has the government in the north been trying to extinguish the people from the Nuba Mountains or remove them from the Nuba Mountains?
Let's see it that way. After the independence of the South, the statement was, yeah, now there will be no more unity in diversity, but we will have the rest of Sudan being an Islamic state. So the Nuba would have never accepted that one. They were partly involved in the liberation of the South. So before the creation of the South Sudan, they were one. And they still belong to the SPLM. It is one SPLM. Though now, after the separation, they are called SPLM North. But I don't think there's any difference just by drawing a new line and making it two states.
Exactly. So
yes. They still belong together.
The border is right through
yes.
the middle of the people.
Yes.
What would be the religious grouping of the people, of the Nuba people?
You have a complete mixture, and it is not right to say it is a religious conflict, because the animists, the Muslims, and the Christians are all affected in the same way. Within the Nuba Mountains, there's no difference. At times a bomb hits a mosque, at times it hits a Catholic church compound. The people are all suffering in the same way. And different from other areas, in the Nuba Mountains, all these groups live peacefully together.
Is there division as a consequence of among the people as a consequence of these attacks? No. But you mentioned the Muslim community within the Nuba people. They too then do not wish this Islamization.
They are not recognized as proper Muslims.
Because they're not Arabs.
They are not following the Quran 100%. They eat, for example, the local pork. They have small pigs, and they eat the meat. They drink a local brew called merisa, made from sorghum. So an ordinary Muslim would not consider them as part of their group. In
2011, there was a peace agreement signed, but as we know, it's not only the Nuba Mountains, it's Abyei, it's South Kordofan, all of these areas along the border. Is it a border war, or is it simply more than a border war?
If the signature was the comprehensive peace agreement, that one ended with the creation of the South Sudan, after the referendum had taken place 6 months earlier. So since then, it seems at least that Khartoum is no more bound to any of the points in the agreement, and the independence of the South, or the referendum, was the only point which was actually held. All the other conditions which were put on paper, like popular consultation, whatever it was supposed to be, in Nuba Mountains and Blue Nile, the referendum for Abyei is still not held, and all these things are shelved. So I think there's a lot still to be done for the international community to go back to board and bring out the papers and compare with what was on paper and what was been implemented.
But you said it's not a religious war.
No.
Is it simply land, or is it because of the oil that is on
It is
the majority on the
it's
south?
not only oil, but it is for surely economic reasons, because there are a lot of minerals expected to be. Some are not even yet on the map, but people know that it is a rich area, of course. And then you have oil, keeping in mind that now after the separation of North and South, 75% of the oil is already in the south. If South Kordofan would also be going to the south, then the sources of the north will be further depleted.
At the moment, there's no oil being pumped from the south to the north. The agreement stipulated that the south has the majority of the oil, but they would pump through the north to the port of Sudan, and that the north would be taking a percentage of those profits. But at the moment, all the taps have been turned off. Is this as a consequence of the war, or what is is it the lack of payments or the corruption?
I think the situation of the oil we can see separate from the war, because oil was pumped before the war, but still the South was cheated. It was supposed to be a certain fee, then some of the oil was confiscated and marketed, and the money never went to the South. So, I mean, the statement of the South Sudanese president that they have not have benefits from the oil for something like 20 years. So if they wait another 2 or 3 years until a pipeline to Kenya and the Indian Ocean is then completed, is maybe a viable thing. Only the state of South Sudan cannot exist within those 2 years without any money.
Yeah, and that's the challenge.
And 98% of the income of the South was from oil.
So what happens now? What are the people doing are the people being paid, the civil servants, the teachers, the doctors? What is the situation without any money being introduced into the society?
I've been in Juba, I think 4 times in the last 6 months, and life has come more or less economically to a standstill. For 6 months the civil servants have not been paid. That means teachers, health personnel, the whole administration. People are there, but you can feel that they are not motivated to do any work.
Are they leaving? Are they going to work to find work elsewhere?
Opportunities, I think they are not that much. If you are lucky, you find maybe a job with an NGO where the money is coming from outside. But those positions, they have been filled before. And people who worked with government, they will also not easily switch over, because the expectation is still there. You have a secure job, maybe up to pension, if you stay with the government. An NGO will maybe give you a contract for 1 or 2 years.
And then you're done.
Yes.
This implies, the government is still there, it's still functioning, but the society, the financial situation is collapsing, that a lot of the social care is being thrown back onto the church. Are there other organizations other than the church helping, or is really the church alone in its efforts in trying to provide services?
In South Sudan, I would see it is a mix. It is government, it is the churches, and it is NGOs. But in South Kordofan, we are more or less one of the remaining providers. There's one other NGO who has not followed the orders of Khartoum to leave the place. All the other NGOs who worked in the Nuba Mountains before, they are trying to help the situation for 70,000 refugees in the Yida refugee camp in Unity State, 20 kilometers from the border.
The refugee camp, how is the church working in this area? I know that the church has been active again, providing health care, for example.
Yes, our focus is on the people in the mountains, because we continue to work in the mountains. So for us, the refugee camp in Yida, we try to channel some of the aid through other players. We don't want to play a major role over there. We facilitate. But Yida for us is just the entry point and ending point of some of the supplies, from where we then take them into the mountains.
Let's go back to the Nuba Mountains.
Yes.
What is it that the church is doing in a practical way, day to day, to help the people?
The diocese is running the only functioning hospital, which serves also as referral hospitals for the few other clinics and health centers remaining. Then
how many people would you be receiving, for example, in the hospital?
At the peak of the war, at times we had about 500 inpatients.
But that was
for
the
a hospital which was the capacity for about 200 beds. So we provided tents, and then people were sleeping just on mattresses on the floor. In the rainy season, that is not also a healthy condition. And then the problem also came up with the discharge of people who had nowhere to go. Where were they going? Their villages were raided down to the ground. So some of them, they got tents, and we have like a refugee camp on the other side of the hospital.
Built around the hospital.
Yes, but you can't keep them inside the hospital because you expose them to health risks which are unnecessary.
Yes.
Yes.
And what would be the kinds of injuries that would be coming into the hospital? What would be the predominant health issue, if you will?
To mention one point, for example, we have about 150 amputees alone since the beginning of the war. You have children, one no arms, others one arm. So we also try to address that situation and help them with artificial limbs. But you bring about 30 people to Uganda for assistance. Whilst you are bringing them back and they are treated, you have about 50 more. So I don't know how we manage that one over maybe the next 2 or 3 years to get all people access to treatment. We tried with the International Red Cross in Juba, but as we talked about the situation of non-payment, there will be no treatment. So to bring people to Juba at the moment is not an option.
And hunger?
Yeah, food is a real issue. As I mentioned before, some of the harvest is destroyed by bombers. So we are trying to address the situation. Even those refugees who have gone to the camp, they say they don't have enough to eat. But at least nobody is starving in the camp. In the Nuba Mountains, people living in caves, it is a different situation, and people have been seen dying, yes.
And they come to the hospital, but often it's too late.
Yes, if it is malnourished children, some of them, they really come too late, because you have also no more means of transportation. There's no fuel. Even if you have vehicles, you have to bring everything inside. And the list is endless. You don't have soap, you don't have salt, you don't have sugar. Then the basic staple food like sorghum and beans, we supply all of that, but what the church can do is still just a drop in the ocean. I think we would need larger players to come with immense supplies.
And there's no visible hope in the near future for an end to this conflict. It seems just to be grinding on and grinding on and grinding on.
The SPLM has nothing to protect themselves against aerial bombardment. The situation on the ground is rather also going in their favor. So I think the two will not continue working like this together. So I think the only option is to have peace negotiations, but then with a mediator who is credible. And that one is not accepted by Khartoum. So as long as these preconditions are there, I don't also know. In the past situations where you negotiated with Khartoum, you just wasted your time, because none of the things which were put on paper are then later implemented. And I don't see at the moment. We hope for peace, but the preconditions for negotiations for me would also be that the aerial bombardment has to stop immediately.
Al-Bashir has been in power for 23 years. His population is declining, as is his health. Is this war in a certain way a distraction for him at home in Khartoum from the fact that his government is less and less in favor?
Yes, of course the business community will also not be happy, because he's restricting trade. Huge areas of population who were buying from merchants in the north are no more existing. They are no more allowed to do trade. Of course, at the same time, then also costs of living exploding in Khartoum. With less income, but to pay higher prices, nobody can imagine that this one is just a joke.
What about the people that could eventually follow al-Bashir? If his health is as bad as it is reputed to be,
yes.
What about those who are, is there a glimmer of hope there, or also not?
Some people say, yeah, if he's replaced, it could be also with somebody who might do worse things, but for me, what I see on a daily basis on the ground is bad enough. So and I can't speculate. I've never been to Khartoum myself, so I think it will be other people who know better than me.
How do you not lose your hope in an environment where you see this ongoing tragedy?
I think you cannot lose hope because you see how the people struggle and how they manage to survive. And if you can facilitate some of those things, that people really get better and have access to means to survive, then it's already a fulfillment. If you see the patients who came to Uganda, for example, that's the best example for me. There was one patient, I don't even remember his name, but he had lost both his legs. He didn't want to have any assistance to come down from the plane into the wheelchair. His arms were as strong as maybe my legs. And I come back 2.5 weeks later, he's walking on 2 artificial legs. And if somebody would have said, yeah, he has an artificial leg, he would have never estimated there were 2.
According to Human Rights Watch, and I'll make a quote here, the Sudanese military has adopted a strategy to treat all populations in rebel areas as enemies and as legitimate targets without distinguishing between civilian and combatant. Is there a risk that the Nuba people could be wiped out?
I think the Nuba have been at constant risk. This is the 3rd war they are enduring. And I don't think as an ethnic group they can be wiped out. I think on the ground they show they are strong enough to defend their homeland. They have nothing to defend themselves against aerial bombardment. And if they say now it is indiscriminate bombing, this is what we experienced from day one of that war. It is just that our institutions have so far not been targeted, but you can never exclude that one because the Antonovs are weapons or planes which don't target very precisely. So they can even hit you by mistake. So
they simply roll the bombs
Yes.
out the back door. Coming just back now to the question of the church, what is it that the church, the local church on the ground needs, and what is it and what can we do to help the church in this situation?
The church needs supplies to continue existing also on the ground. That one for sure. This our emergency program takes care of that one. But I think the church has another role also to play, and we as the diocese are trying to bring that into the limelight of the international community and the world at large. That this conflict is happening where a president kills his own people. There were other examples before, and the international community intervened. Now, at present, we hear on a daily basis about Syria. Before it was Egypt, now it is Mali. Nuba Mountains is just almost under the carpet.
Why is that, do you think?
I think Sudan is playing its card to make the world believe that this is an internal problem of North Sudan. And I don't know, maybe they are successful with this one. Maybe also the South should put this problem more into the public. But I think the South at present has so many economical problems, and we also should keep in mind that at any time, before independence and also after independence, the North is trying to destabilize the South constantly.
Are you not afraid for your own safety?
I've been there before the war, I've been there in the war, and I see our people up to now not personally being targeted. I mean, it is worth to take the risk. And I think the local population who lives in caves and is exposed to snakes and scorpions, I think they suffer because we still have means to survive. You take a risk, okay. That one I agree.
Stephan Marks, thank you very much for having been with us today in our program.
Thank you to have me too.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for having been with us today in our program, Where God Weeps. And if you'd like to know more about the situation of the church, of the people, the Nuba people in the Nuba Mountains, I would encourage you to look at the contact information at the end of this program. And we look forward to seeing you next week. Take care.